everybody. I was already introduced, but I'm going to introduce myself again. My name is Judy Hottensen, and while most of you don't know who I am, you probably know the woman sitting next to me is Candace Bushnell, my colleague and friend of 25 plus years. Just to orient you, I'm going to tell you a little bit about how I met Candace and share some of our very juicy stories from the past. Just kidding. So I am currently the associate publisher of Grove Atlantic, a New York-based publisher that I've been working on and off in various roles for about 3 decades. I remember vividly the first time I met Candace. It was 1993, quite a while ago, and we met in a downtown bar, of course, and it was called Automatic Slims, which still happens to be in business. So if you're in the West Village, you can go there. I looked it up, and it says, "This no-frills burger and beer joint becomes a lively and often crowded party scene after the sun sets." And indeed, it was way after sunset when I met Candace in a bar. We were introduced by our mutual friend, one-time man about town, and the publisher of Grove Atlantic, Morgan Entrekin. To say that we hit it off was an understatement. Candace, her ever gorgeous self, dressed to the nines, looking like a fashionista, and just warm, smart, hilarious. I knew I had found a friend, and I was so happy. In 1994, Candace began her legendary column, Sex and the City, in the New York Observer, and I'm sure all of you know about that. Hungry readers began to clamor for the next issue. Who were these people? I felt like I knew them, and every crazy thing that was going on seemed familiar to me. Who was having sex with who? Well, you could read the column and find out. Candace and I began to see each other at parties and with people such as Morgan, Jay McInerney, the novelist, Bret Easton Ellis, and many other journalists, writers, and amazingly fun people. I felt lucky when Candace was around. It was double fun. This is the final paragraph, don't worry. And then we get to you. One night after a publishing party, we had dinner at the very trendy, be-seen hotspot, the Bowery Bar in downtown Manhattan, another bar that's still there. You can still go. It was Candace and Mr. Big in tow, Morgan and I, and it was after a publishing party. After midnight, that Morgan said, "Candace, do you have enough columns of Sex and the City to make a book? Let's do it." So we all toasted in a real Sex and the City style. We made a deal right then and there, and the rest is history. Let me just tell you a bit about Candace before I turn the microphone over to her for a reading. Candace is the critically acclaimed, internationally best-selling author of Sex and the City, Four Blondes, Lipstick Jungle, The Carrie Diaries, 1 Fifth Avenue, Trading Up, Summer in the City, and Killing Monica. It's quite a list of books. The aforementioned Sex and the City, published in 1996, was, of course, the basis for the HBO series. Like, duh, it was a book, and then it became a series on TV. Lipstick Jungle also became a popular TV series on NBC, as did The Carrie Diaries on the CW. Now, let's move on to the real reason we are here. Candace's new book, which I am thrilled beyond anything to publish, Is There Still Sex in the City?, follows a new cohort of female friends as they navigate life and dating in midlife. Already, it had just published last week, by the way. It has already been praised in People, Vogue, Harper's Bazaar, Elle, Washington Post, New York Times, The New Yorker. Candace was on the cover of Hampton's magazine. She appeared on Good Morning America. I'm just dizzy with all the press we have and all the great sales we have so far. But please welcome my dear friend Candace Bushnell, best-selling author and the author of Is There Still Sex in the City?
I'm going to try to stand up, and I'm going to try to read with these old middle-aged eyes, and I don't know how it will go. But I do really want to read this section to you. my inspiration for writing this new book, Is There Still Sex in the City, was actually very similar to my inspiration when I was writing Sex in the City. When I started writing Sex in the City, I was a single woman in my mid-30s. And at that time, there weren't supposed to be any single women in their mid-30s. And yet there we were. And what we couldn't figure out was why were there so many great single women and no great single men to marry them? And that was Sex in the City. Well, like many of my Sex and the City friends, I ended up getting married and, in a sense, finding what I thought was my happily ever after with a man I called Mr. Bigger because he was 10 years younger and about 6 inches taller than my real Mr. Big. But then I found out, well, there can be something that happens after the happily ever after. And maybe it's not what you expected. And that's what I found when I found myself at the age of 53, divorced and single again, and start having to reinvent my life all over. And so I went through this passage of time in my 50s. I call it MAM, or middle-age madness. It's when a lot of different things hit you at once. And you're especially vulnerable if you do end up getting divorced or separated or whatever and find yourself dating again in your 50s. Now, at first, when I got divorced, I really thought, you know what? I've done it. I've done the entire relationship cycle. I met someone, I married them, I was in love with them, it was wonderful, and then divorce. So I thought, why would anybody ever want to try that again? Well, I was able to live in my single, don't try this again bliss for a couple of years until all of a sudden a lot of my other girlfriends ended up getting divorced as well. Some of them had planned to get divorced for a couple of years and then had managed to get divorced, and others had found themselves, like me, unexpectedly divorced. And strangely, unlike me, what they all wanted to do was start dating again. Anyway, I got pulled into it. And there were all different kinds of men who we met, some of whom are cubs, who are younger guys, who are after older women. I call them catnips. They're not Mrs. Robinson. These guys are after them. And then there's another type of guy who I met, and a lot of my friends had met him as well. And I call this the he's as old as your father guy. The reality of middle-aged dating, in which the men your age want to be with women who are 20 years younger, can cause some middle-aged women to try to game the odds in their favor by playing the game, i.e. dating a man who is 15, 20, even 25 years older, which means, given the fact that you're now middle-aged yourself, a man who is 70, 75, 80, you wouldn't think there would be a large contingent of men around that age who are dating. But when you think about demographics and how so many of the boomers are now in their later years, and it makes sense that there's a crop of 60, 70, and even 80-something men out there acting like they are 35. I encountered one of these men at a party given by a sensible married couple in their early 60s. There were lots of 50-something single women there like me, and 2 or 3 of these senior age players, or saps, as I call them. These are older single men of means, meaning they have enough money to add it to their list of attributes and are often still employed in a lesser version of the high-powered career they once had. At some point during the party, I must have talked to one of these men because a few days later, Ron, the host of the party, contacted me to let me know that a fellow named Arnold was interested in taking me out. Ron was very excited about this and impressed. He said Arnold was a big deal, and he really admired the guy. Arnold played Ivy League football, and he was once an oil man and a newspaper magnate, and all the Park Avenue hostesses were always inviting him to their parties. He was sought after. I thought I remembered the guy, a tall, thick, battle-axe type who was definitely older. Too old for me, I decided. How old is he, I asked. Hold on. He's a little older than I am, Ron said. 68. These guys always lie about their ages. They fudge, somehow forgetting about that truth-telling device called the internet. Sure enough, when I Googled him, Arnold turned out to be 78. That made him much closer to my father's age than mine. My father was 83. Arnold was just 5 years younger. They couldn't have been more different, though. My father's very conservative. Arnold apparently was not. According to Ron, Arnold used to be somewhat of a notorious wild man who went to Studio 54. Even to this day, Arnold still has much younger girlfriends, the last one being 45. I don't know how he does it, Ron said. I wanted to tell Ron that I didn't want to be the one to find out. And so I tried to say no. Peer pressure, however, is one of the things I hadn't counted on in middle age. And when it came to middle-age dating, it turned out there was a lot of it. My friends kept reminding me that it was good to go out, and it was really good that someone had actually asked me out. When was the last time that it happened? Of course I should go. What was the harm in it? And besides, you never know. Of course, the problem with you never know is that so often you do know. I knew, or I was convinced I knew, that I was not going to date a 78-year-old man no matter how wonderful he was. What if he fell down? I didn't spend my life working this hard to end up taking care of a strange older person. But every time I tried to explain this, I realized how ageist and judgy and anti-love hopeful I sounded. Because I didn't know, did I? I didn't know what was going to happen. What if I fell in love with him? In which case his age wouldn't matter, right? Plus, I didn't want to be that woman. You know, that shallow creature who cares more about practicality than the blind illusions of love. Plus, as Ron reminded me, I must feel so honored that a man as powerful as Arnold wanted to spend time with little old me. In preparation for the date, I went to my friend Sassy's house, and we looked at photographs of Arnold on the internet. His photos went back almost 40 years. He'd been a big man and rather handsome. Oh, honey, Sassy said, he could turn out to be absolutely wonderful. You must keep an open mind. And so arrangements for a date were negotiated. We could have gone to a restaurant in my town, but Arnold really wanted me to go to see his house, which was in another town about 30 minutes away. But he would pick me up and take me to his town and show me his house. And then I could always spend the night at his house if I needed to, and he could drive me back to my house in the morning. A sleepover? With a 78-year-old man I didn't know? I don't think so. Thank
you. Well, that's a really good preview of the book.
As Taffy Acker said, if you like that and you find that funny, then you'll like the book and find it funny.
Exactly. But Candace, so there are other, obviously middle-aged dating presents challenges, and this book deals with a lot of those. But tell us about the other side of the coin, the younger men that find the middle-aged women.
Well, first of all, I should say that, the book is really a lot about friendship and how things kind of go full circle and you really need your friends again. And I was in a very lucky situation where I had a couple of friends who they moved to this small town outside of New York, and I was able to move there too. And then when our friends got divorced, they all came into this circle and we all bonded again. And it really kind of felt like those Sex and the City years. Especially given this very strange thing that happened to all of us, and that was that young men were pursuing us. And I'm not kidding. They were, I know. Do you remember that episode when, well, I don't know how big Sex and the City fans you guys are, but there's an episode where Samantha, who she kind of has sex with everybody, a delivery guy comes to her door, a FedEx delivery guy, and she ends up having sex with him. Well, my friend had a FedEx delivery guy come, and he had her number, and he was really flirting with her, and she was like, what's going on? And he left. He sent her a text. He said he really wanted to hang out with her. He wanted to see her. He thought she was so beautiful. And she was like, are you kidding? And then he was like, why? What's wrong? Is 22 too young for you? And she said, yes. And he said, wow, that really hurts. And it kept happening. It happened to me. It happened to so many of my friends. And it's just, it's interesting because the men your age really, they're not used to seeing women who are 50 or so as being attractive, but younger men who've grown up with the internet and porn, they look at it very differently. So that was one of the interesting chapters in the book.
I mean, I think the thing, so Candace and I were talking about this last night when we were having dinner. We grew up in a time and dated in a time back in the 90s and in the 80s where, you got invitations in the mail to parties, you called people on the phone, you waited at home for people to call. We did not have cell phones, we did not have email, we did not have porn on the internet, and nor did we have Tinder. Candace has a really great chapter in this book about a Tinder episode that you could just tell us a little about.
Well, that was really one of the things that really started the book going. I was, kind of happily living in Connecticut, and I was writing different things. I was writing something about the 1770s and and then some stuff maybe about the future, but so I was really having a good time. And then I got an email from the woman who was the editor-in-chief of Cosmopolitan magazine, and she basically, her subject line was help. I thought, well, this is really strange. So she said that, she was like, please, you've got to help us. You've got to do a story on Tinder, which is a dating app. And she said, it's ruining the lives of my friends. And I thought, well, you know what? This is really kind of over the top. I mean, people have been dating forever. What could possibly be new with dating? So I kind of said, I don't think I want to do it. And she was like, you've got to. It's ruining my friends' lives. You have to help us. So I said, okay, I'll do it. So I really did it in the old style of the way I did my Sex and the City columns, where I gathered, a bunch of young women together to talk about it. And then I went on the app myself and looked into it. But it was really interesting because they all seemed really unhappy. And I remember dating in the 80s and 90s. Yes, it was hard, but they just seemed so just kind of defeated. And it turns out that it is a pretty soulless kind of pursuit. And that was definitely something that has changed. Like the way that we meet people has really changed profoundly. And at one time, it was like going out in person and seeking meeting someone. Now you meet somebody basically lying in your bed on your phone. And people tend to be really bad at reading other people through screens. I think that's why we have movie stars. You know, if you ever meet like a movie star, they're this tall, and they're like really? But you can't tell. And that's really true of the internet. So it seemed like they put a lot of, there's a lot of effort towards arranging a date and texting, and then when they would get to the date, the dates were really disappointing, and there was no romance.
Well, like you said, that they'd go to Starbucks, or they'd go to the ATM.
Yes, they went to Starbucks. One went to the dry cleaner. Yes, and she was like, "That's an outing." But it's, it's pretty.
Go home, right? I mean, it was very different than what we went through. When we were dating, it was like a date. We went out to dinner.
Yes.
We went to a party, or it is a tough, transition.
It's a very different world.
Yeah.
It really is.
You guys, when you read this book, or if you have read it, you will find this amazing group of women, and a lot of them are based very much on Candace's, friends and the people she knows now, but it's really a major part of the book. I mean, obviously sex is in the title, but as we were discussing, it's also a book about friendship, and it's about companionship, and it's about middle-aged women mostly, and how they support each other. And I wonder if you could just talk about that a little bit, like how you were able to get that so across in this book. I mean, it makes my heart sing.
Oh, wow, thank you. That's very nice. It just really came out of, of real life, of women, again, finding themselves single. And also, traditionally, women always have this secret plan of, hey, what's going to happen when we get really old? Women don't say, oh, I'm going to find some young person to take care of me, the way men do. But women always say, well, we'll all live in a house together, and we'll look after each other. So it's really, I think it's that kind of idea. And traditionally, men have, died before women, so
survival. In many ways, yeah.
Exactly.
So Candace, what I love about your work, and even just back to Sex and the City and everything else, is your comparisons to Dorothy Parker and Edith Wharton and Jane Austen, and getting in there and really finding the heart of the matter of what people are saying, what they're talking about, what's happening in social situations. How do you do that so well? Are you always looking?
Well, I always, ever since I was a kid, I was always interested in other kids, what they were up to. I had 2 younger sisters, and it really came out of what's funny to kids, which is just simple humor and sarcasm. And when I was really little, my sister and I would tell each other stories, and our favorite story was about the neighbors. And one of them would go to the bathroom, they would sit on the toilet, and then they would get flushed down the toilet, and then they would come out in somebody else's toilet and surprise them. For some reason. And we loved this story because it was like, well, when they arrived, what were the people doing? What did the bedroom look like? And so really, in a way, that was kind of, I suppose it was just a natural beginning of looking at people and wanting to tell stories about them. And even when I was younger, even when I was very young, I always felt like I could kind of, was very sensitive to people and could kind of like feel a lot of things about them that other people didn't seem to notice.
Yeah.
So I always felt a little bit odd. But and then of course Harriet the Spy was a big influence. I don't know how many of you guys read that, but my sisters and I read it. We had all the spy equipment. We had a spy belt, and we did spy on our neighbors, and we got caught. And we got in trouble. And then we had a babysitter, a guy who lived up the street, and this kid was a bad kid. He put firecrackers in people's mailboxes, and he stole our flashlights, our mini flashlights. We were mad. But it's like that kind of thing. And then when I first moved to New York, and I think it was like 1978, I'd grown up, it was conservative where I lived. It was very waspy. Everybody was pretty much the same. Everybody dressed the same. Everybody was, nobody was really rich. Nobody was really poor. It was like, and everybody thought the same and all that. And then when I moved to New York, it was like, oh my God, look at all these different kinds of people. This is amazing and fascinating. So I immediately started writing about these crazy people. And in a way, I've never stopped. I mean, I feel a little bit like an outsider, but I also feel like I do get on the inside. But, I feel like I've seen people who are super successful and they're really, really ambitious, and people who are ruthless, and people who aren't, people who are going to make it, those who aren't. There's just all different kinds of people, and that always really fascinates me. And I have always loved the social novel, which would be Vanity Fair, novels by Edith Wharton. There's novels like Madame Bovary, and all of these books about they're really kind of woman versus society, and so that's always been a fascination. I mean, I think if I could have lived in England, like in the 1700s, I would have been perfect. Although I think it was very smelly.
Do you think you always knew you would be a writer? I mean, you obviously wanted to be.
Yes,
when I met
do.
You were, but
yes, I do. I knew that I wanted to be a writer since really when I was 8. And I kind of had an epiphany moment. But anyway, you know what? Maybe we should open it up to some questions from the audience, because I know you guys probably have a lot of questions. I don't know if somebody's got a question about Mr. Big. Yes, I see somebody does. Okay, let's do that. And question. All right.
I have another question.
Wait,
okay.
He's got a question.
The Tinder experience.
Yes.
You indicated Cosmopolitan contacted you, and the editor or whoever it said it's ruining the lives of my friends. Why was it ruining their lives? Because they were finding they were not able to develop meaningful relationships through this medium?
Yes. I mean, that's really the problem with these apps, and especially with an app like Tinder. I mean, it's interesting to me, like, how people, their mating and dating rituals. And with every technological advance, our mating and dating rituals have changed. The car changed things a lot, the phone changed things a lot, and the internet has changed things. And up until about 10 or 15 years ago, online dating was really considered something for older people. For people who were, in their 40s or whatever. It was Match.com, Plenty of Fish. And then Tinder came along, and Tinder is a hookup app. So it's not really... the idea on Tinder is not like, oh, I'm going to find the love of my life. It's, you put up some pictures. It actually uses an algorithm. If you have a Facebook page, it will take pictures off of your Facebook page. So if you really think about it, you're giving this app, it's really gathering information, like a lot of these apps are. And then when you play it, it's like a card game. And, it really is a little bit like being in Vegas, and people do get addicted to it. And people get on it, and then they can't get off of it, and then they meet people. And what the women found was that they felt that they were really meeting, and maybe this shouldn't be a surprise, but they felt that they were really meeting sub-quality guys. I don't know how else to say it, but they felt that all these guys were really damaged in some way. But talking to the guys who were on the app, what was interesting was that these guys said they hated the app because they felt like it brought the worst out in them in terms of, really objectifying a potential partner. So using the app made them, especially if they had sisters or something. This one guy I talked to was like, he'd been on Tinder. He used Tinder. He took a cross-country trip, and he used Tinder to find women whose places he could stay at. All right?
It's like Airbnb.
He would, he would go to a bar in town. He'd go on Tinder, find an attractive woman, she'd come. He was a really nice guy, and he'd be like, I need a place to stay. Oh, come on over. And he hated himself for doing it, but I actually thought he was kind of clever. But the guys universally said that, the other guys on Tinder were horrible, except for them. But, when men say something is bad, or when men say bad things about other men, it's really bad, okay? Because they usually don't say bad things about each other. So it's very interesting. A question in the back, yes?
If you would not have become a writer, what do you think you might have liked to do, or are you doing it?
I probably want to be a pop star. I'm not kidding. I weirdly have like some songwriting and singing abilities, but that was even more, becoming a writer. From when I would tell people I wanted to be a writer in my town, it was so bizarre to them. Nobody did anything creative. If I'd said I wanted to be a pop star, that would have just forget it. But Madonna's my same age, and she was in New York at the same time I was, and she became a pop star, and I was just a scribbler.
So
yes.
Go ahead.
Thank you. From depth. Is that what you're asking? I'm sorry? Is that what you're asking? Well, the interesting thing is when I was writing this book, 2 people died. When I was writing it, my father and one of my best friends took her own life. And, it was really, really hard. And it's just, I think as a human being, one has to learn how to deal with loss and go on. Unfortunately, that is definitely one of the lessons of, this passage that I call man. Is, real stuff happens to you that really affects your psyche. And it changes your relationship with yourself in a sense, because you always think of yourself as being, as having parents. And when I lost my father, I went through what a lot of people go through, this feeling of like, oh my God, I'm an orphan. And because it's so hard to imagine yourself as having no parents. And that's a real psychological hurdle. But then I also realized that it was actually a gift, because I didn't have to worry about what the old man thought anymore. And it's a reality. He was kind of pretty judgy. And now I'm like, you know what? I'm 60. And it's really about, you got to make the best and you just got to go forward. And it is also about staying in the world and finding things that you still want to do. And death can really, I've seen so many people when for instance, their parents died. There was a while when they did not believe in God anymore. And I don't even know that these people weren't religious, but it was kind of like whatever little bit of religiousness they had, they lost that. And that's really disconcerting. But it comes back. So it seems like it's part of the mourning process. And my father always used to say, don't let these events in life hit you twice. He said they hit you once, and then if you can't get over it, it hits you again. And then if you can't get over it, it's going to hit you again. So he would always say, you've got to, try to move on. So that's what I've learned to do. And it doesn't mean that one's not scared or alone, but there's strength in it.
For sure.
And sir, I hope that you are okay. If we can do anything, please let us know. I'm sorry. Obviously, you've had a loss. All right. Another question.
Hello.
Yes, over here.
Okay, this is not a specific question, but I think most of us in the room would love to hear the author of Sex and the City talk about her own Mr. Big.
Talk about so you would like me to talk about my own Mr. Big. I did have a Mr. Big, and now lots of people have asked me, when you're writing a book like Sex and the City, or Is There Still Sex in the City, men must be running a mile from you, right? Wrong. I actually met Mr. Big, and I met my new boyfriend when I was writing Is There Still Sex in the City, but I met him when I was writing Sex in the City. And, I'd actually forgotten about this, but I first met him, I was working at Vogue magazine, and he was the publisher of Vogue. So Anna Wintour, who was the editor-in-chief, she always wanted me to do like these weird dresses, like wear a rubber dress and this and that, and then she would make me pose with a 16-year-old model, and I was like, really? But so I was videotaping something, and the real Mr. Big, he was down there kibitzing around with the camera crew because like he'd seen him in Paris with his girlfriend Candace Bushnell, the world's first supermodel. But they'd broken up. So anyway, I saw him, and I was like, that guy's pretty sexy. And then it was Fashion Week, and I went to a party, and he was there again. So I started talking to him, and I think maybe I gave him my number, and I was like I felt like I was so bold, because I normally never would have done something like that. But because I was writing the column, I was like, I've got a reason. And then the next day, or maybe it was the day after that, I went to a fashion show. Guess who was there? Mr. Big. He was sitting in the front row, and I was sitting in the second row. And when he saw me, he was like, come up here and sit next to me. And then my Stanford Blatch was like, but that's Madonna's seat. And then my Mr. Big said, I'm the publisher of Vogue. I outrank Madonna. So I'm kind of making this up, but it could be true. And I called him Mr. Big because he really was big man on campus, and he was a great guy. He was, he was very powerful, but he really was a nice guy. And when I look back on it, he was kind of in his late 40s, or maybe mid 40s, but he'd been working since he was 18, and he wanted to leave the city. And I was 35, and I felt like I was just getting going, and so the last thing I wanted to do was leave the city. And in the end, he did indeed, that part with like Natasha, like that happened, but not that scissors stuff or any of that. But he did get married, and he moved to Vermont, and he lives in Vermont, and he rides horses, and he's got a big farm, which is exactly what I want right now. I'm like, are you kidding? So anyway, yes, that's the story. But also with Mr. Big, I always wondered, did I really want to date Mr. Big, or did I want to be Mr. Big? And I really wanted to be my own Mr. Big at that point. I really did. So that's my story.
And you totally succeeded.
Well, I don't know about that. But another question. Yes, here.
How did it go from the column to HBO? Did they approach you? Yeah.
Well, that's an interesting story, because I think I'd written maybe 5 columns when we did the book deal.
Yep.
And then it was the summer, and all the people, the New York Observer didn't have a big circulation, but everybody who read it was in the media, and they would send it to their friends in LA by fax. So all these people in LA were reading it, and I was getting a lot of calls from people. I mean, I got a call from these 2 women at HBO, and then I got a call. I had like calls from ABC and this and that, but I didn't take any of it seriously. And then I would go to the beach with Mr. Big, and there was a guy there who worked for HBO named Richard Plepler, who actually just retired. And he was like, we really want to buy it at HBO. And in that time, I had met Darren Star and become really good friends with him. And when I told him it was going to be a book and there was all this interest, he said, I want to buy it. Now, he'd done Melrose Place in 90210, and we really had a similar sense of humor. He was a great guy, and we had so much fun together, and he said he wanted to buy it, so I was like, yeah, why not? He's great. And then HBO and ABC both still wanted it, and then we talked about it a lot, and he really wanted to not do something that was on network, because he wanted to do something that was different, and so we went with HBO, and so that's how that happened.
And HBO was pretty new then, right?
Yes, I think HBO had one other show, Arliss.
Yeah, I mean, it was really like its main, launching pad, Sex and the City.
Yes.
I feel like.
Exactly.
Writers are on
Well, at the beginning, there were 4, and then over time, it's more and more. So I don't know how many people worked on it. I worked on the show the first 2 seasons, and then I actually published my second book with Grove Atlantic called Four Blondes, and that was a big New York Times bestseller. So after that, I was like, I'm not going to write scripts.
With Four Blondes, what we did for an advertising campaign, it was the most fun thing I ever did as a publisher. We put banners behind the airplanes that were going through the Hamptons, to the beaches. So we did Cape Cod, and we did Miami. And in those days, it was really inexpensive to do these banners. And it was like 4 blondes would go by. And we had an incredibly fun time publishing that book.
Yes.
So fun.
It was a simpler, less expensive time.
But I just want to add that, so this book has been sold to TV,
yes.
and Candace is going to be involved in that as much as she wants to be, or doesn't want to be. I think she'll decide, but I think it's pretty awesome.
They're coming next week.
Oh, yeah.
The people from Hollywood, the producer and hopefully the co-writer are coming to New York, and we're gonna have work meetings. So, but TV is pretty stressful. Like, you're pretty much always in trouble. You always feel like you're about to go to the principal's office, and you have that queasy feeling in your stomach. So, it's stressful.
But it sells books.
Another question here. Yes.
Do you think that the same ladies that played in Sex and the City will be interested in being the new or is it different?
No, I mean, they're all doing different things, and also, well, this book has all different characters, and people say, like, oh, why don't you continue with those characters? But I can't, because those characters are so big, and they've been in so many different iterations, and they really, really belong to the audience. I mean, I don't know if there's any way, everybody's got so many opinions about those characters, and I feel like the audience really owns those characters. So that's why I have different characters. Yes, here.
So did they pull you into the movies for Sex and the City at all, or was that separate from?
No, I wasn't involved in the movies at all. And Michael Patrick King did them, and he was partners with Darren Star. I think it was like the first 2 or 3 years, and then Darren left to go do some other stuff. So then Michael ran the show, and then he did the 2 movies. So, and then with the 3rd movie, I didn't even know there was going to be a 3rd movie until there was no 3rd movie. I was like, wait, I didn't even know there was going to be, but okay, bummer. Yes.
Which Sex and the City character do you relate to most? Would it be Carrie, or do you kind of feel like you're a little bit of all 4 of them?
Well, Carrie was really my alter ego. And I created the character because my parents, I was writing for the New York Observer, Sex and the City, and my parents, who again were very conservative, they said, we've got a subscription to the New York Observer. We're going to read it every week. And I was like, oh, no. So I immediately went, and I was just sitting there, and this name came to me, Carrie Bradshaw. And that was it. So that's how Carrie Bradshaw was born, really, to try to do the old double switchback maneuver on my parents.
Sarah Mel. She's got
Not really. No. asks that, it's so. No, I mean, I really don't. I would, the only thing I could say is, but, it's stuff like smile, be positive. But I hate to say that because everybody says that to women all the time. And we know, like, really? But I do think, I think, one's got to be positive. I mean, I'm kind of in the, I think it's good to see the best in the people around you. A lot of people feel like, I gotta search high and low for this person, they're out there. It's like, it's probably not that complicated. And, relationships are, the older one gets, the more one realizes that, it's less about, like, this idea of, ooh, true love, and it's partly a lifestyle choice, I mean, a lot of relationships, that's a lifestyle. It's a lot of planning. It's a reproductive lifestyle. It's the raising of children. So I would really say, I think these days, it seems like people have a hard time, or younger people have a hard time with the relationship thing. So I kind of think there should be like relationship training. I don't know. Maybe I should do 5-day seminars and do something like Married at First Sight. But I'm as fascinated as you are, and I don't have any answers.
But I will say that, Candace, when I have relationship issues or questions, she gives me the best advice. So she knows how to do it. She's just not going to do a general, like, hey, this is what you should do to succeed. But the one thing I wanted to say also, just in what you were saying about this book, and it is so much about, I love your sort of piece about, it's not necessarily, like, people are so much nicer when you get older. Like, you figure out that it's not a nasty world out there, that everybody seems like they're just, as we get older, we have a little bit more compassion and
Yes.
receptiveness and companionship.
20-something people are mean. How many of you guys remember being in your 20s? I mean, that was hard being in your 20s. And 30s too. People do get nicer. That's the good thing. So anyway, yes.
That's
I'm sorry.
it.
Oh, okay. So
Any other questions?
So anyway,
Few
well,
more
that's
minutes?
fantastic, guys. Thank you so much.